let's start. So I'm here with George Hook, pugilist pundit, and he's going to be talking about Michael Collins. So who is Michael Collins, and why is he the greatest Irishman ever to live?
Well, there would have been no independence without Collins. That's crucially important, I think, because this was a force that was outnumbered. The opposition was the British Empire, and in a way, this man brought the British Empire to the negotiating table. Now, nobody had done that in the history of the British Empire. I mean, India were to do it later, and then the emerging nations of Africa. But this is the first one. This is the first crack in the British Empire. And Churchill knew that. Yeah. And that's why Churchill was afraid of Collins, because he knew that Collins was the man. Yeah. De Valera was ascetic, theoretician. Collins was a man of action. And he had a great ability to lead men. And women loved him. But he led men. So therefore that was his strength. And then the extraordinary thing about Collins is that he was in the first government. He was Minister for Finance and Commander-in-Chief of the Army. I mean, they're two extraordinarily different portfolios to pull together. So here was this man of action. And then we suddenly discovered he was a man of extraordinary accounting probity. Yeah. So therefore, if you think of the kind of scandals that particularly if you look at the expenses scandal in the British Parliament, apart from our own, there was none of that in Collins. Well, so his death, therefore, changed the Irish landscape. And the party of Collins, first Cumann Gael, then Fine Gael, the party of Collins always was beaten at the polls, by smarter guys, but not better guys.
Yeah. But he also had probity with the gun at the time, so as well as expenses scandal, we still have the dissonance today. So technically in his time he was an IRA man, so how can one condemn the current IRA and celebrate the previous IRA? That's a big question.
Well, it is a big question, but if you look at the history of the British Empire, it's interesting. The only one in the empire, really, that sort of established independence without using a gun was, in fact, India under Gandhi. But they had to deal with the so-called terrorists in Malaya. Yeah. They had to deal with the so-called terrorists in Kenya, and all through the emerging nations in Africa, leaders who sat down at Commonwealth negotiating tables had previously been described as terrorists.
What about today's terrorists?
Well, the difference, I think, for me, it's a very difficult difference, because what Collins was part of a nation that was subjugated. Yeah. The problem for Northern Ireland, I think, was that there was never a sense that they were going to solve this ultimately by peaceful means. And the extraordinary thing is that 30 years of conflict, ultimately, it took an American to come over, George Mitchell, and once these guys sat down, we got an answer. And what we have in Northern Ireland today, I believe we could have and should have achieved in 1969 in many ways, in that by having that kind of devolved government.
But this even talk today, it's fascinating for me to come down and see the divisions, the Civil War divisions that still perpetuate today, having come from Northern Ireland where we're rapidly divided. But is this sort of commemoration, it partitions a community up there? If we want to have a united Ireland, I see it as divisive and far away as ever, and this is why I'm coming down here as a Lundy unionist, to find out what this is and to say how can you remember Michael Collins, but by remembering, are you not forgetting maybe the Edward Carson tradition, the tradition who were genuinely Irishmen, who were part of what they saw as an Irish nation, but who happened to want to maintain a union?
Well, you see, I think in the midst of all this conflict over the last 100-odd years, huge things have been lost. So all these tens of thousands of southern Irish nationalists who fought in World War I were wiped out of Irish history. Of course, in Northern Ireland, the Ulstermen marching to the Somme and so on, they were quite rightly recognised. We were extraordinary. I mean, the IRA who carried on during the 40s and 50s and so on, they actually blew up monuments to men who had died in the First World War. No understanding at all of what that meant. And therefore, I think it is still possible to marry these great traditions.
What has this? What sort of relevance has this? Does this not turn off unionists who have a very deep affection and connection for?
I tell you why it doesn't turn off unionists, and it certainly doesn't turn off unionists if they listen to me.
Yeah.
All right. This speech is about what kind of an Ireland we would have had under Collins. We would have had a different Ireland, a better Ireland.
Yeah.
We would not have this supremely Catholic Ireland with a right-wing Catholic constitution, which was offensive to Northern Ireland, for instance.
Yeah.
He wouldn't at the same time.
So Home Rule was vindicated.
I think absolutely.
And people need to come look at the facts there and give an answer to that.
But Collins believed in the Commonwealth of Nations.
Yeah.
Collins believed that Ireland, and it did in 1931, Ireland stood foursquare with Canada, New Zealand, Australia and South Africa, who all wanted to be within a Commonwealth but independent, and they were.
But lastly, to really home in on that, how are people in the South and from the Republican tradition going to reach out to the monarchist tradition? Because that's what it is. The loyalists, the unionists still cherish and value monarchy. How are you going to reach out? It's okay sort of saying we need to, but...
Well, I'm not going to see United Ireland in my lifetime.
Yeah.
My son isn't going to see United Ireland in his lifetime. But it's interesting, in the week that Albert Reynolds died and will be buried, that what was agreed in that great truce that he negotiated with John Major was that it recognised that only when a majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted a United Ireland that it would happen.
Okay.
And the Protestant community can rest easy. But finally this, my great hope for this country is reinforced every February and every March in Lansdowne Road.
Yes.
When an Irish team goes out, stands for our own Nevian, and half the time in history they've been led by Ulster Protestants. So I think, in the same way as sport brought South Africa out of apartheid, I believe that great belief in how people can understand each other better will bring us together.
That's a very relevant, relevant, profound word. So thank you very much.
Not at all. Pleasure.
Okay. Enjoy the day.
George, every woman.